Good morning, everyone. I am Dr. Meredith, and thanks for joining us today with Parkinson's Point, our Health Promotion and Wellness Center for folks with Parkinson's. And today we are going to be talking about nutrition with Dr. Emma Wilder. And so I will turn it over to Dr. Emma, who will share a little more about our topic today.
Perfect. Well, thanks y'all for having me. Excited to chat again. I know we've been kind of doing our nutrition series a little bit here. So so first off, are there any questions? Does anyone have any questions that they wanted to answer, whether it's from last time or just in general? No? Okay, great. I just like to check in because sometimes people have little things that, they're thinking about and stuff. But so today we're kind of taking a step back from talking about a specific type of diet or specific foods. And we're kind of looking at the practicalities of navigating the grocery store and how can we eat healthy at home? Because I think we get a lot of times it's like, oh, I know, like I've heard this or I've seen this on paper of what I need to do. And then when you get to the grocery store, it's like, oh, wait, what again am I supposed to eat? And I get questions all the time of like, is Dave's Killer Bread what you're saying I should eat or not? So I think today is like a great topic just to let's talk about the practicalities and kind of go through that. We can at the very end throw in a couple tips too for eating out, because I think that's another big area that a lot of people have questions about. But let's start with the grocery store. And I want to start with the grocery store too, because I think probably the easiest way to actually eat the kinds of food that you want and that's good for Parkinson's is to cook at home, to whether it's you or you have your maybe loved one or a partner or a family member or somebody who can help you with that. So let's just picture your favorite grocery store. So if we're going to walk in and be oriented to your favorite grocery store, the first thing I want you to do is think about our main zones that we want to visit. So there are certain aisles in the grocery store that, quite frankly, I don't even want you walking down, because we get oh, maybe I need these chips and these pretzels and all these delicious things. And we don't even really need to visit those. And it kind of gets distracting when we go down those aisles. So when you're first kind of coming in, usually on one end of the store is produce. That's usually how most grocery stores are kind of oriented. So that's the zone that I want you to visit every single time you go to the grocery store. And that's also the zone that I think can be the most helpful to do more frequent visits during the week. So if you do one main grocery shop on the weekend or at the beginning of your week to kind of prep for your whole week, if you want to kind of come back to the grocery store to get some more fresh produce, because you're eating, you buy some fresh produce for a couple of days and then you want to come back for your next round of fresh produce, I think that's the best way to do it. So always kind of, we're thinking about going through the periphery of the store. So we're starting on that side of the fresh produce. A lot of times they also will tuck away on a wall or in a corner in the fresh produce area, the bulk items. So sometimes there's a bulk section on a different aisle, but a lot of times it's tucked away kind of on the side. And I like bulk because it has a lot of just very single ingredient, non-processed things. So they might have oh, here's a bulk thing of nuts, and here's a bulk thing of rice, and here's a bulk thing of dried beans. And you can get all those things in bags and in cans and stuff too. But a lot of times you can kind of, seeds, you can get, dried fruit like prunes, you can get a lot of those things in the bulk section. And it's nice to have a few canisters and jars at home of some of these bulk dried staples. We have some nuts, we have some rice, we have some beans, we have some steel cut oats, we have a few things that you're I can pretty easily combine a couple of these things and throw together a meal. And then as I go through the week, I can go get back and get my fresh produce to add in. But those are a lot of the staples. So definitely it's worth taking some time to orient to different produce sections and take a look at some of those extra walls and corners, because a lot of times that's where the bulk things will be. And something too that I would recommend when you're kind of trying to expand your diet and stuff, there's actually a lot of produce that people have never tried, and it's hanging out right in the produce section. So I ask people a lot of times, they think of like root vegetables, there's carrots and there's potatoes. And there's a whole section of root veggies, even in the produce, that'll have things like rutabagas and parsnips and beets and sunchokes or Jerusalem artichokes and a whole bunch of other things that people have never tried. And that's like at King Supers if you're over in Colorado, or here I'm in Vermont and there's different stores here. But so I think too, within the produce section, it's a really great place to try new things and get variety. For those of us who are, don't just want to eat broccoli always as our one veggie, like it's fun to get some different variety. And if you poke around and take a little bit of time in the produce section, you'll find lots and lots of healthy things that follow a lot of the diet that we're thinking about: fruits, vegetables, aromatics, mushrooms, herbs and spices, all that stuff. So that's probably maybe the most important section in the grocery store, and the section that we want to spend the most time in. We want to fill up our bags mostly with that stuff. But then as we go around the store, the rice, bean, dried food section, that's a great aisle to also pop down. So that might have like your oatmeal, millet, quinoa, beans and lentils, dried spices and herbs, sometimes like the canned tomatoes. So a lot of that's a great aisle, again, to do a lot of our shopping in. And the periphery, so as we continue to go down the periphery, we also want to take a look at some of the, the fresh. So if you are choosing to have some yogurt in your diet or eggs or things like that, that's also going to be in the periphery. I think there's an aisle that can really get us. We can find some good things in this aisle, and then the aisle can kind of trip us up a little bit, which is the frozen section. So we can have like a lot of frozen fruits and some frozen veggies, and they're just straight. There's no ingredients. There's hardly any processing. It's just a bag of frozen spinach or a bag of our frozen berries, which a lot of times we can save some money upfront from buying things frozen. And especially if you're a single person, or maybe there's two of you and you feel like you don't go through fresh produce and you're wasting produce, sometimes it's nice to get some frozen stuff. So I'm a big fan of that. However, we also find like frozen meals and ice cream and all sorts of things down the frozen aisle. So just like go ahead, like go to the aisle knowing, what you're really looking for. But I think the frozen stuff can also be great for those of us who sometimes find ourselves in a pinch and like, oh, great, we have our rice and beans. We're going to throw in some greens and that we have in the freezer, and we can like put an egg on top or some nuts or like whatever it is. And you can pretty easily like piece together a meal. So I think those are the main areas. And then when you're thinking about it, you're like, oh wow, there's so many aisles. There's like breakfast aisles and snack aisles and chip aisles and drink aisles, and there's lots of things. But for the most part, if we're trying to think about eating foods in their unprocessed state, we're trying to eat a lot of natural things, whole foods, lots of plant foods, and really just trying to stay away from a lot of the processed added things. We end up kind of avoiding a lot of the aisles in the grocery store. I think the last section, when I mentioned beverages, there is a section that has tea and coffee in the store. And I think that's a great place to just go peek around. A lot of times people will ask about, well, if I can't do soda or I can't do alcohol or whatever it is they're avoiding, fruit juices, trying to avoid those too, like what can we drink? And there are a lot of different herbal teas in a lot of tea sections. And that can be a way to have something that's tasty, has a flavor, and sometimes, it has these added health benefits. And it adds to our hydration. There's no caffeine in it. So there can be a lot of great herbal teas down that aisle. So that's my like number one tip is think about the grocery store kind of your main hot sections. These are the sections that I want to visit the most. And truthfully, just kind of avoid a lot of the other aisles. And that can help us just stay a little bit more focused on like what we're trying to fill our cart with and what we're trying to bring home. I will say, and this is a tip that I've realized over the years, it's never a good idea to go to the grocery store hungry, because all of a sudden all these other things look so good. We're so like, oh, actually, yeah, maybe I do want that snack, or like I do want that thing, or like I'm just so hungry I don't even care. So I, over the years, have realized this about myself. And so it's something that, you know, when I tell to other people, they're like, oh yeah, that's a good point. So it's a great thing to be like, oh, I had my meal and then I'm going to the grocery store, or like definitely take the time to have a snack before you go to the grocery store, and shop from that place of like, oh, I'm trying to, you know, fill these healthy things up, and not the place of like, I'll just eat anything. I'm just ready to eat anything. So, all right, that's my major navigating the grocery store. Are there any questions about that, comments? But did I see someone raise their hand? No? Okay. I wasn't sure if you're muted or not, maybe.
Yeah, it looks like, I mean, folks are muted at this point, but you guys can just unmute yourself.
Okay, no questions, that's all. Thank you.
Oh, okay, no question, got it.
Brian, did you have a question? Just unmute yourself. Go ahead, Daryl. Brian's muted.
What's your opinion?
Who's going?
Daryl, why don't you go first? Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I'm interested in Celestial Seasonings teas, primarily because they're decaffeinated as a rule, or don't have any caffeine at all. But I don't think they've been tested with various medications. Some things like St. John's wort, for example, interacts badly with many medications.
Right, so there are some herbs that don't interact, or there can be some interactions with medications, and there can be a variety of herbs. For the most part, a lot of what is sold in the grocery store are not these category of herbs. So usually we might think of like ginger tea, peppermint tea, chamomile, licorice, like there's a lot of these herbs that are, for the most part, at the doses, especially that are in these tea bags, they're mostly safe. But if you are taking any medications, I definitely recommend working with a provider who is trained in herbs and who can actually tell you if they interact or not. I will say that in my professional experience, there are some providers, particularly MDs and DOs, who will say, oh no, herbs, don't take that, but they don't have any training with herbs. And so definitely ask a provider who actually is trained to give you an answer that's based on evidence, that's based on research, because they know that, instead of just being like, don't take any herbs, don't drink any tea because it interacts, because that's just not true. Some of them do, but some of them don't. So, you know, that's a good way to do it. But I do think, you know, as like a kind of like one guideline would be, is this something that I would cook with? So like ginger is a great example of, ginger is in like curries and Indian food, like all sorts of food that we eat all the time. And it's, you know, it's a food, it's really safe. And you can have ginger tea, and that, you know, is a safe tea to have, or mint, like you know, if you go to a Mediterranean market or you're cooking yourself, mint will be one of the herbs that you cook with a lot, and that's really safe. Celestial Seasonings has a great one. It's called Bengal Spice. Have you ever tried that one?
No.
Okay, I like Bengal Spice because it has a lot of these, it's a very warming tea, spice filled tea. So it has ginger, cardamom, cloves, nutmeg, cinnamon, chicory root, things like that. And it's, so from a Parkinson's perspective, those are all really rich in antioxidants, because those are some of our spices that are really rich in those phenols. So that can be really great. And again, these are culinary herbs. Like no doctor has told you never to eat cinnamon. Like don't eat your cinnamon apple, you know, cinnamon toast, cinnamon, you know, cinnamon is like for almost everyone, it's really safe. So that could be a guideline to just read the label, like read what's actually in the blend and what's actually in the tea, and then bring your questions to someone who can answer it. Yeah.
Have you heard of mud tea? That's kind of new.
Could you repeat the name of the tea?
It's mud coffee. Not coffee at all, but it's the alternative to Starbucks. It's made up from a bunch of different herbs and.
Okay. I have heard of, like, there are a lot of different coffee substitutes. So some of them use like mushrooms, some of them will use like dandelion root and chicory root, and some other things like that. So I think it's, for a lot of people, it's a great option. And a lot of times these other herbs or these other things like a mushroom based tea will have all these added health benefits. But just, yeah, again, just check whatever specific thing you're interested in taking, consult with a provider who could give you a good answer for you, depending on what you're taking medication wise and everything else. Yeah. But I love a lot of these blends of roots and mushrooms and all the other stuff, because they can be so helpful and healthy for us too.
And Daryl, I think you had a question as well. Go ahead.
Yeah. What is your opinion on these like Home Chef and Blue Apron and those kind of meals? What is your opinion about those?
Yeah, so I think that can be like meal delivery kind of services is what we're talking about, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I do think that there are some really great options, and I think especially nowadays, I see so many options that you can say, like, I'm low salt, I'm pescatarian with veggies, like you can individualize it pretty well. And I think that especially if you're someone who doesn't like to cook or has limitations with cooking, that getting those meals delivered can be a great option. And I think at a previous time, I think I shared a few different potential resources of different types of meal services for the local, like, Denver metro area, which may apply to other places beyond that. But I think, yeah, finding one that is fit, is a good fit for you, depending on what kind of dietary thing you're trying. I think it's excellent.
You think it would be good to help kickstart a Mediterranean diet that way, or just start trying to do all the stuff yourself?
I would say I would consider a few things. So one, if you don't cook at all, it could be a huge ask to, like, all of a sudden say, I have to cook all the meals for me or for my family. And it could be helpful also, like, how busy are you? Are there some days of the week where, schedule, work, kids, grandkids, like whatever the situation is, makes it really challenging? Like, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays are so busy for me, and those are the days that I want to get some support. And then on the weekends or a few days a week, I feel like I can handle the Mediterranean. But it also could be an idea of, like, I'm going to get the meal plan service just so I can start eating this way and start to get more comfortable with it. And then I'm going to practice my cooking and my grocery shopping skills and practice getting that down. And when I'm more comfortable, then I can maybe reduce or stop using the meal service. But I think to kickstart it for a lot of people, that will help get over the barrier, because sometimes it can be like, I have this information and I want to start, but I just don't know how I can, take those actionable steps.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. Okay, great. Well, let's go on to the next kind of big topic, which I think is learning how to read and understand nutrition label. So I think this one is something that I probably recommend to basically all my patients is learn how to read a nutrition label. Because a lot of the questions that I get, like even Brian, your question of like, well, you know, should I try this tea or not? It can, a lot of times you can even answer it if you know how to read the label and see like what's actually in this product and can I like understand what it's saying. So, and one little like spoiler alert, a lot of the foods that we're trying to eat don't come with a nutrition label, like apples and kale and nuts and rice. Like a lot of, some of them come in bags with, nutrition labels, but like, for example, almost all your like just regular produce won't have a nutrition label because, it's whole food. So that can be like, number one, can be a hint that if it doesn't come with a label, it's probably good for you. And the next hint is that the ingredient list, if you're reading the ingredient list and it's more than 5 or 6 things, that's also a hint that maybe this is really processed and I probably shouldn't be eating it. So if you have a list of like 40 things for this tiny little like protein bar or whatever, it's kind of a hint that that's like a pretty highly processed food that we're kind of trying to, stay away from as much as possible. So that's kind of the broad, but basically the main sections of a nutrition label, I can try to pull this up from you, but it's going to have like the top will have serving information. So it'll say like, servings per container and serving size. It'll give us our total calories, and then it'll kind of break down into fats, cholesterol, sodium, total carbs, and our protein. So these are our macronutrients. So our macronutrients are fats, carbohydrates, and proteins. So kind of the big groups, which we've talked about all these in the past, but it kind of gives us the breakdown of those groups. And then at the bottom, it will usually pull out a quick, like they'll select a couple of nutrients. So a lot of times it's like calcium, vitamin D, iron, and potassium usually. Sometimes they pull out a couple extra, but they'll just pull out a couple and say what, the percentage of the daily value per serving. So when looking at the nutrition label, and then the bottom is the ingredients. So I think the first thing I would do is actually look at the ingredient list. And again, if it's 30 things, if it has things that you can't even pronounce, if there are a bunch of numbers like 5 red, that means a dye, like food, like again, for example, apples doesn't come with numerical numbers in it. Only really processed things and manufactured things will have numbers in it, or will have things that you can't pronounce, like dextromethod, but like you're like, I don't even know what this word is. So that's another indication of like highly processed things. So the ingredient list though is really important to take a look at, because from a marketing perspective, there is so much science and so much money put in to marketing and trying to get you to eat something. So a lot of times people say like, but it says a whole grain loaf of bread on the front. And then you turn it over and you read the ingredients and you're like, oh, there's added sugar and there's these conditioners and texture agents. And technically there are some whole grain flour in it, but it's only 20% and the other 80% is white flour. And so I would almost kind of ignore what the front of the label says and just flip it over and actually read the ingredient list and see what's in it. And then you can be able to like answer for yourself a lot of the time, like, should I have this or should I not? The other area that to pay attention to is the serving size. So a lot of times the serving size will be like 1/3 of a cup. And most of us don't eat just 1/3 of a cup of something. A lot of times we're eating like a much more robust serving. And so if you just looked at the label really quickly and you were like, oh, it's only, 250 calories if you're trying to count calories, or it's only 9 grams of fat, and that's within, my low fat diet, if that's what you're following. But look at that, that's per whatever serving that they've indicated. And so if you're going to eat a cup of that item, you actually have to multiply it by 3 if the serving size is only 1/3 of a cup. So that's definitely important to kind of, pay a little bit of attention to as well when you're reading. An area that I think I get a lot of confusion on is the sugars section. So let's pause real quick because it'll tell you there's a total carbohydrate breakdown. And then it'll say like dietary fiber, total sugars, and added sugars. So there's kind of these subcategories. Fiber is non-absorbable form of sugar. And we've talked about fiber in the past. Fiber is what helps you, it feeds our gut bacteria, it helps you poop, it is going to slow down absorption of sugar, it's going to reduce absorption of cholesterol. So we want to have a diet that's rich in fiber. And so if you're wondering like, oh, I have this label that has a lot of carbs, but how much fiber is in it? You subtract, you do total carbs minus your fiber, and that gives you the remaining sugar of what you'll actually be absorbing. So let me pull up an example. So if raspberries were to have a nutrition label, it would say for 1 cup of raspberries, there's 15 grams of total carbohydrates, and there's 8 grams of dietary fiber. So if you're thinking, is 15 grams like too high of carbohydrates? Well, the actual amount of carbohydrates you're getting from the raspberries is your total carbs minus the fiber. And then you actually end up with only 7 grams of carbohydrate. And that's the amount that you're getting. And that's actually a really low carbohydrate food. So a lot of times people would be like, oh, but like fruit has all this sugar in it. And it depends on the fruit. And you always want to take into consideration the fiber content of that fruit because you're not absorbing the fiber. So, for people who are diabetic and who have to count calories for insulin and all of that stuff, you subtract the fiber so you're not overcounting and overdosing for yourself. But for those of us who are just interested in maybe reducing our simple sugars or reducing our added sugars, that's how we can take a look at that carbohydrate section. Similarly with fat, they have a breakdown of saturated fat and other types of fat. And so you can, if you're trying to avoid certain things, you can look at that breakdown, can be really helpful instead of just the total amount of fat. Okay, the last thing I'll say about the nutrition label is also that they don't put in, like we mentioned, it doesn't include all of your vitamins and minerals. There's some that are missing. And so just because you don't see it listed there doesn't mean that it's not actually part of the label or part of what's in that food. So a lot of times people will be like, well, but there's no vitamin C in this food, so I shouldn't eat it. And a lot of times vitamin C is not included in the label. They only put a couple of the things. Like I said, a lot of times it's just the calcium or an iron, potassium. So, so some of our other things like B vitamins and magnesium and some of our other minerals are not usually listed there. So I think for takeaway for nutrition labels is really like, number one, avoiding, like a lot of times avoiding things that even have labels, and if not, just read the ingredients. That's probably the most important thing when it comes to the nutrition label. If you can't pronounce something, it's really probably not a whole food option. And then when you're looking at what's actually in this food and is it following whatever diet or diet guideline am I looking for, we're really considering, what's the serving size that they're saying versus what am I eating? And then, just slowly go through the process of, does it have the healthy fats or not that I'm looking for? Does it have the fiber content that I'm looking for? protein, because we talked about timing of protein. And then again, with vitamins and minerals, there's only a couple listed there. It's per serving. And just because it's not listed doesn't mean that it doesn't have other things in it. Okay. Any questions about nutrition labels that come to mind? No? Okay. Okay. I would say that it can be a little intimidating at first, but definitely just practice. Just get in the practice of it. If you ever see me at the grocery store, I'll be the person who's standing there literally reading like 2 different things for like even like minutes at a time. And people are like, excuse me, I'm trying to shop here. And I'm just standing there reading because that's really that's the best way to actually know what you're eating, is to really look at what's in there. Because otherwise it'll be like, oh, this is a whole grain, or this says it has healthy fats, or this, it says it's a cute picture of like happy people on it. I'll just eat that because I'm sure that'll be good for me. And like, just reading the labels is like the best way to go. And then also, once you read the labels and you find something that works for you, then you don't have to keep reading it necessarily. Sometimes they change a little bit, but once you read it, you kind of get a sense of like, okay, this is something that I do or don't want to include in my diet, and then you don't have to stand there. But you can be like me and stand in the grocery aisle and like read labels every time you go grocery shopping. So there's that. Okay, so I think the last couple things just wanted to touch upon were like a few other strategies of when we go grocery shopping. So I think I mentioned this one a little bit when we first started talking, but the frequency of grocery trips. So how often are we grocery shopping? And I like to do, I think the strategy that works really well for most people is to do your larger bulk shop and this is going to be the shop that you refill your olive oil, you refill your grains or your beans, nuts and seeds, dried spices and herbs, teas. Like you're kind of thinking of the goods that will, they stay good for a long time and are kind of periodic, or like, oh, I am making Dr. Wilder's like chia flax oatmeal bonanza, so I need all those like dried, fiber rich foods. And then to really go more frequently for the fresh fruits and vegetables. And that way there's less food waste in general. And you get to have a little bit more variety, and maybe you don't always know everything that you're going to cook that week, but you have a couple days planned out so you can get a few things and then, kind of keep going. And storing fruits and vegetables, so you can store things to help them last longer. So one strategy is popping them in a little glass of water. So herbs like cilantro and parsley, dill, even those like scallions or the green onions, a lot of times they can wilt really quickly. So what I like to do is when I get home, you don't even have to, but you can just like trim the very, very bottoms if they're looking a little dry. And then you pop them in a glass of water. And they perk right up and they'll last for the whole week because they're plants, they're living plants. So if you think about even just like when you get a bouquet of flowers or something and you want to put it in a vase of water, it lasts so much longer. So I like that a lot for herbs, for the green onions. And then like airtight containers can be really helpful too. So like berries usually come in those little like plastic clamshells with all the holes. And a lot of times they can spoil much more quickly than if you just transfer the berries into like a glass Tupperware and then you close it up and you keep it that way. And then a lot of fruit like bananas and apples and a few other fruits, they release these chemicals, like normal natural pheromones essentially, that communicate with the other fruit to tell them to ripen faster. So if you want things to not ripen as fast, keep them separate from your bananas and your apples. Or if you're like me and you want to find that really sweet spot of an avocado, because avocados, they go from like not ripe to brown, and there's like a 30-minute window, it feels like sometimes, where they're actually like, oh yay, they're ready to eat. But you can kind of like, oh, they're really green and hard because I didn't want them to spoil. So I'm gonna literally put them in the same basket with my apples and my bananas, so they'll ripen faster. And then if they all ripen, like let's say you got 3 and they all ripened at the same time, pop them in the fridge. And that's gonna put almost like a pause on how quickly they ripen. And then you can like slowly eat them. So there are definitely some strategies and like thinking about food prep of how to get like especially your fresh produce to stay good and to last longer. And dried goods definitely, they stay good for longer, and same thing with frozen and stuff. So it can even, like we said, it can be really beneficial to think about who are you and how fast do you go through things, and having some frozen fruits and veggies on hand. I definitely recommend frozen, like fresher frozen fruits and vegetables more than canned. So that would be kind of that strategy. And some fridges also have like temperature control in the little drawers, like the produce drawers at the bottom. And so that can also be helpful to actually like use them and change the temperatures and stuff that like our fridge naturally has it built in, and you can like make it a little bit colder to keep them, fresh and good for longer. Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
I learned several years ago that you can cut the bottom off of a stalk of broccoli, just a thin sliver, or cauliflower, even like zucchini. If you cut the tip of the stalk off and dip it in, soak it in water, they will keep for about a week.
Yeah, exactly. They're plants. Like think of them as like bouquets of flowers, but they're plants.
If they have a stalk or a vine, pretty much you can cut them and put them in a coffee cup or a glass or bowl of water. I get 5 to 7 days out of them.
Awesome. I love that. I love that tip. I do that too. I don't know if you do this, Brian, but sometimes I'll be like, oh, I'm definitely going to cook with these veggies, and that's what I bought for this dish. And then sometimes I look back in the fridge and I'm like, whoops, I forgot that one thing. So that's when I especially use that tip to be like, oh, well, I'm not going to cook again for another 3 or 4 days, but I want this to stay good, and I'm going to throw that into the next dish. So just like you said, just the tiniest sliver, right? You just need to get exposed to that healthy part of the stock and put it in water. Yeah. I think, are you muted, Margie?
Do you have any suggestion for a dry cereal that, you go down the cereal aisle and it's just like overwhelming and nothing seems to be nutritious, but is there a dry cereal that you can eat that is good for you? Besides oatmeal and stuff like that, but something that you don't have to cook.
Something that you don't have to cook. Okay. Well, I do think you're onto something when you're saying like cereal, mostly nothing looks good. That's like it. Number one, I would say that I don't really recommend cereal for that exact reason. Like it's actually not very nutritious as a food. There is something though. I'm pulling it up here so I can read it to you. So, are you familiar with Bob's Red Mill?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they make something called Old Country Style Muesli cereal. And that would probably be my best recommendation as something that you can like leave it in milk or plant milk for a little bit and let it soak, but you don't have to. You can eat it without cooking it. And so it uses whole grain wheat, dates, sunflower seeds, raisins, rye, barley, oats, almonds, flax seeds, and walnuts.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the only ingredients.
Mm-hmm. And so that's a fairly healthy.
So I would say out of the cereal options, that would be my go-to, because we have some of those whole grains, we have some seeds and nuts, not in very high portions. I would still definitely say add in your flax and add in your chia and add some walnuts, like bump it up a little bit if you can. But that one is pretty good. And why I say that is because I just read the ingredient list. So it doesn't have added sugars. It is whole grains.
Mhm.
2, I headed over to the next part of the food label, and it has some protein in it, like 4 grams of protein per serving. It also has 4 grams of fiber
Mhm.
per serving. So we're getting some of our fiber, no added sugars, very low in fat. And then there's like lots of ways you could do it. And that's just for a quarter cup. So if you're going to do like a half cup, you're getting 8 grams of fiber and 8 grams of protein. Or even a full cup. If you're like, I need to be really energized for the day, you're getting 16 grams of fiber, and we're aiming for like 35 grams of fiber a day. So then if you just add in a little more seeds and nuts, you're well over halfway for the day.
Mhm. Okay, then I have another question. What about a bread that you would recommend?
So that's another thing that I don't think we should eat that much of.
Yeah.
To be perfectly honest. So bread is an interesting thing. So the 2 things I would really consider would be if you can find local bakeries that do like a whole wheat sourdough. That's my favorite combination because we're doing a whole grain, and the sourdough helps us to digest it better, and it lowers kind of our blood sugar a little bit. And how much, spike of sugar and spike of inflammation we get. So that's actually my first recommendation, is to see. I know, like, for example, back when I was in Denver, I think it's just called the Denver Bread Company, actually. They make fresh loaves of bread that are like whole wheat sourdough loaves, like all in one. There's a recipe, I think I might have sent out at some point, but maybe I didn't, that you can make your own bread. But then after that, I would see, if you're not going to make your own, and if you don't have a bakery or something that you can go to, then, I would look at the store and kind of look for something like that. Even Great Harvest, that can sometimes, Whole Foods, I think, has a whole wheat sourdough bread called From Bread Alone is what the company is called.
Mhm.
But bread is one of the ones, the reason why I'm a little like hesitant about bread in general is that in order to keep it good, you have to add in a lot of like stabilizers and textures and conditioners and preservatives and all that stuff. Because if you think about like a fresh baked loaf of bread, you know how it goes stale usually within a couple days. So in order to keep that nice fluffy sandwich bread, good for months and months at a time, they have to, process it quite a lot. So usually I recommend, how can we incorporate more recipes that we don't even need bread? And if we do have bread occasionally, then kind of going for that whole wheat sourdough type thing. And this one that I was talking about, the Bread Alone brand, when I look at the nutrition label, it's made with whole wheat flour, dark rye flour, and salt. And those are the only ingredients. There aren't preservatives, there aren't additives, there aren't conditioners in it. And that's how I'm giving you that recommendation, because I just don't, I don't see those things. And then when I turn over and look at the nutrition label, I'm seeing fiber and I'm seeing protein, and like it's part of a whole food group.
Yeah. I would be interested in getting your recipe for a loaf of bread.
Sure. Yes. I got it from, I am not a baker. So I got this from Lily Nichols. She's an RD, and I can send that email, that kind of like with the recap. I'll send her recipe. I just want to own that. That's not my recipe, but that's the one I use when I do make bread.
Okay.
Yeah. The bread question. I get it every single time. Yeah. Go ahead, Brian. If you had another question, it looked like maybe you did.
Yeah, I did. I'm sorry, it takes me a while to get up to the mute to unmute myself. You said Old Country something cereal?
Old Country Muesli, Muesli, and it's Bob's Red Mill is the brand.
Yeah, that's an easy one to find at the grocery store. I see it at King Soopers. That's one
Okay, yeah.
That's where I get it from too, King Soopers.
Do you have King Soopers in Connecticut?
Let's see, over here, no, they do not. There's all these other stores that I don't even know what they're called. I just pull up like Shaw's and something, I don't know. Yeah, but very similar. You know, the interesting thing is I do not have allegiance to like brands or stores or anything like that, because you know, like Whole Foods does not make better Bob's Red Mill muesli. It's the same thing at different stores, and they can even just charge you a different price because it might be Whole Foods or Vitamin Cottage or Sprouts, and it's supposed to be healthier. But you can find the same thing a lot of times at stores. Again, just read the labels and stuff, but I don't have allegiance to like a certain store for that reason. So if I mention certain grocery stores, it's just as examples, but I think that you can eat a really healthy diet. Like even going to somewhere like Walgreens or Target, where we may not originally think that they have a lot of healthy groceries, but they actually can have produce, and they can sometimes carry some of the things that we're looking for. Yeah. So, well, great. It's been so lovely to chat with you all. Thank you so much for all of your questions, and I hope this was helpful. Yeah, and happy shopping. I'm like really hungry now. I don't know about you. I'm like at lunchtime. I'm like, I'm gonna go eat some lunch before I go see my next patients. But hope you all have a really great rest of your days.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Emma. That was a great talk and all very helpful, practical info. So feel free to, I will send out our recap and our video in case you missed this talk, so you can catch it. Or if you just want to hear it again, see what you forgot. So thank you, and we'll see you next month.